There's not much other use for it. So.
All right, now how much of a tie-in is there to the World's Fair on this?
We're proposing as part of the World's Fair. We're saying that if you had a dome stadium as part of the World's Fair, you could probably have 3 games a day. It would leave enough for Chicago professional teams to play each other. You could invite the world's professional teams to play during the fair.
You'd get it off to a fast start, in other words.
A very fast start.
Quick question, who pays for this?
Well, we think it would have to be paid for with, for example, the Park District or some other created body could issue tax-exempt bonds.
If it's a World's Fair timing, if you do it with the World's Fair, could you not take part of the millions of federal dollars that will go into the U.S. Pavilion and maybe, could you make that the U.S. Pavilion in effect?
Well, that's what we've suggested because there's already $90 million committed by the U.S. government for a U.S. Pavilion. Why not have the Dome Stadium as the U.S. Pavilion to use during the fair and then as a legacy for Chicago afterwards? That wouldn't pay for it all, but would help.
Let's go back to Dave Van Dyke. You're the sports expert. Does this make sense to you, the location, the funding, the timing, etc., from an overall sports business viewpoint?
I think so. I'm not sure that either team would like to wait until 1992 to move into a new stadium, especially the Cubs. I really feel the Tribune Company wants to build and move into a new stadium as soon as possible. The funding makes sense. I think if we have a municipal stadium, we might see something unique in Chicago, and that would be both teams playing in it. And it can be worked out, of course. Both teams now play when one's out of town, the other's at home most of the time. And it can be worked out that both would be.
Now, for years it was, I'm sorry, location.
Yeah, location I don't think is the most ideal, but it's not bad because we have Soldier Field now. I would like to see it where Soldier Field is. I'd like to see Soldier Field demolished and
I'd like to argue
start
with that
over.
a little bit. Because we think that the 2 legs of the red dome that we showed, you could have almost all the city's public transportation passing through those legs as well as access, direct access from the Dan Ryan. So we think for location, both public and private, it's a good location.
I think if that's the case, then I think it is a good location.
I want to put some pressure on Ms. Kaszak and go back to the Wrigley Field thing, because let's talk about the timing of this. You say, Dave, very accurately, I think, the Trib doesn't want to wait until 1992. But if it thought it could get some playoff games, presuming some winning, and all of this is rather presumptuous, I suppose, but if it could get some playoff games and a couple of World Series games in at night, if it could start to experiment with light, it could limp its way into 1992 and the Dome Stadium. Come on. How about it, Lakeview?
The question is this. Are you willing to risk the protection of city services in terms of fire and police protection to people's homes in order that the Tribune Company can make more money?
But let me just suggest, I remember going over to Wrigley Field when it was sold out, and I was thinking, oh, it's going to take me forever to park. I want to tell you, the police over there were, traffic was moving in and out, and it was 5 times more pleasant experience on a day it was sold out than I ever expected.
And at what cost? In order for there to be police officers there, they've had to double the special detail unit, which is the police department that deals with that.
So that kind of activity, it could be argued, a very smart move by the city. It's cost-effective.
Well, I mean, what it does is it takes police officers from all over the north side and assigns them to Wrigley Field. And if there were to be night games, you would need to have approximately 50 police officers there. That would mean taking probably 30 police officers from districts all over the north side. And I say that, why should these other communities be endangered in that way?
Okay, good evening. You're on the air.
Good evening. A question for Ms. Kaszak, please. If the Cubs were to leave Wrigley Field, has she thought about the future of her investment, her property as an investment, in that Wrigley Field has kept her investment strong?
What is the relationship between the presence of that field and your property values? Is that known?
Well, I don't think it has any effect on the property values of my home, but it's really not a question of property values. It's a question of safety and the reasonable, and whether or not you're willing to endanger people's lives so that the Tribune Company can make more money.
Good evening. You're on the air. Go right ahead.
Question is that if the Cubs move out, a lot of people that live in this neighborhood and have jobs related to them will lose our livelihood. If lights will keep our jobs, then I'm all for it.
Do you have a job there?
My family has a job related with the ballpark.
Tavern?
Excuse me?
Tavern?
Yes.
Okay. You want to answer that? You've already really answered
Yeah, the
it, I think.
people in the community, I've always supported the local businesses, and if we leave, the businesses are going to be hurt again.
Do you have much support, do you think, in your neighborhood for this, for your viewpoint?
Absolutely. We had 250 people show up in probably 3 inches of snow this evening.
Do you have any dissent of any significance up there?
I haven't been able to find it.
All right, now I want to go back to the Dome Stadium, because all of this talk, a lot of this talk, not only the Dome Stadium, but the whole lights thing, is based on the premise of success. Chicago now has the problem of winning teams, and where are we going to house them? Isn't it a wonderful problem to have? Is the premise sound, Dave?
Of winning teams?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I think so, because when Dallas Green came in, he said, we're going to change things. Do you want things the way they were? And everybody said, no, we want winners. Well, then as soon as he traded Bill Buckner, everybody cried, we don't want to trade
don't
Bill.
want your kind
He
of
said,
winning?
well, do you want the change or don't you want the change? And everybody said, okay. Now, he says, his next statement was, we can win at night. That's the only way we can win. So now he's going to go to another stadium or get lights in the stadium, and everybody says, you can't change Wrigley Field, you can't tear down Wrigley Field, and he'll say, do you want a winner or don't you want a winner? And everybody will say yes. I think that, yes, I think that it does matter that the team is successful.
You had a story that really created a buzz in which you suggested that if the Trib gets impatient, it has to go elsewhere and build its own stadium. It can't win in Lakeview. That if it doesn't include the White Sox might get mad and go off. Now, number one, why should the White Sox get mad and go off? And number two, the Trib, given the Dome Stadium talk and going on, isn't going to go off and build anything by itself, is it?
I wouldn't discount it. I think the Tribune might get impatient, and depending on whether they ever build a stadium or not, might go ahead and build its own stadium, depending on where the Tribune Company owns land.
Has anybody confirmed that at the Trib with you in conversations?
That what?
That they might do that?
That they might build a stadium? Well, Jim Finks, before he resigned as president, said that within 5 years there would be plans for a new baseball stadium.
Did that get him in trouble?
I don't think so. I don't think Jim Finks ever got himself into trouble by things he said. He's a very soft-spoken
Why is he
person,
out?
as Nancy knows.
Just to
Well, nobody really knows. Well, there's two people that know at least, and neither one of them is talking. We aren't sure why he's out.
Okay, now I want to go back to Betty Cerf Hill and talk about this Dome Stadium. For years, there's been resistance here because people said, hey, they're money losers, they've been white elephants in other cities, and besides, why don't we do something about our failing public schools, our crumbling infrastructure in this town before we get around to a, let's face it, a kind of ornament in the toy department.
Have they really been saying that, or have they just been resisting doming Soldiers Field?
Well, Dave, haven't they been saying things like that? Hasn't there been heartfelt, I mean, we don't have one. Somebody's been resisting it.
First of all, fans very much like the two stadia we have. They
Absolutely.
love Wrigley Field and they like Comiskey Park. I'm not sure anybody likes Soldier Field very well, but they like the two baseball parks. They don't want to see the teams move, and they've heard horror stories in other towns about how much the Astrodome has lost and the Superdome in New Orleans, and they're just horror stories. And I think the other thing people are nervous about is who pays for it. I don't want to, as a taxpayer, they're saying, pay for a new stadium. So
well,
Tribune Company
but
has
there's
to place
little
this.
evidence that they pay for themselves in some of these other cities. Is that correct?
There's also evidence that stadiums do pay for themselves. In fact, Soldier Field right now is making a mint for the Chicago Park District, just from the Chicago Bears, and they only play there 10 times a year.
Right, and a Dome Stadium, you could, you know, if you managed it right. Remembering that we have 6 professional teams. I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking about the Cubs, but we've got 6 professional sports teams in this city. If only 2 of them you really committed to the stadium, it would probably be enough.
And it's not really difficult to imagine, for example, the Sting playing there, or would the Bulls play in a stadium
No,
like
but
that?
they could conceivably. The Detroit Pistons do. They play in the Silverdome. There's 162 baseball games a year if both teams play there. There's 10 to 12 Bear games a year.
The whole concert world seems to be burgeoning also. Are those
sure.
done in Dome Stadium?
Oh, sure.
All the time, right?
And
Super Bowl could come here. We wouldn't have to go
with a dome. I'm not in favor of a dome, but with a dome.
How about a retractable dome?
Well, I think a retractable dome is. I would have to see one to believe it. I've never seen one.
Here's my fantasy: retractable dome, and I think if we could get a man to the moon, we can get AstroTurf that doesn't kill quarterbacks' elbows when they fall and others. Now, isn't that possible in the 21st century?
Well,
Let's get a World's Fair that brings the science to reform AstroTurf. quick question on the, you didn't answer my question on the White Sox. Are they really thinking about going to Denver or someplace else if the Trib builds its own stadium?
Well, obviously the White Sox won't say they will. Jerry Reinsdorf, the board chairman, will say that's hypothetical and I won't answer it. But yes, I believe in my heart that if they felt that the Tribune Company were getting special favor and having a ballpark built for them and the White Sox weren't included in it, I think they'd feel very hurt. And there's a lot of reasons for this, again, John, more than just a stadium. It's the Cubs would play night games, which would hurt the Sox audience. WGN would have all night games to show on television. And now the White Sox are kind of second sister.
Okay, last question to Ms. Hill. Can there be, and would you argue for a dome stadium in the location that you mentioned or elsewhere in the absence of a World's Fair?
Oh, yes, probably. I think in climate like ours and with as many teams as we have, you know, isn't it a question of time about a dome stadium?
It's a question of time here, and we want to thank Bette Cerf Hill for being with us this evening, and Nancy Kaszak and Dave Van Dyke of the Sun-Times. Thank you all very much, and thank you for being with us. I'm John Calloway. Good night.